a component called the tractor feed. The ribbon contains the ink that is transferred onto the paper, and the tractor feed is used to draw continuous feed paper up through the printer. So how does this all work? The tractor feed pulls a piece of paper and rolls it around the platen. If you were to look at it end on, the platen would be here, the print head would be here, and the piece of paper would be rolled up around it like that. The print head has a series of pins. The number of pins can vary. A very expensive dot matrix printer will have only 9 pins, as you see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A more expensive, higher quality dot matrix printer might have upwards of 24 different pins. Each of these pins is actually retracted inside the print head. Let's look at a close-up view here of the print head turned 90 degrees from where we're looking at it now. So we've got our piece of paper here. We've got our platen right here. Inside this print head, each of these pins look like this, and they've got a spring right here that keeps them pulled inside of the print head. Back here, they have an electrical solenoid. To print, the printer sends electrical current through the pattern of these pins. When the solenoid receives that current, it fires the pin out like this. They hit the ribbon up against the paper and leave an imprint on the paper. By using a variety of patterns, we can create different letters. For instance, with this 9-head pin, if we wanted to make the letter A, we would fire these pins, and there's our letter A. Using only 9 pins means that the letters don't have great quality. The more pins you have in the print head, the better the print quality. Many 9-pin dot matrix printers compensate by making 2 passes for each line of text. By doing that, it can create better, more regular-looking letters. By going through and creating each letter in the line twice, it can actually use 2 different patterns in the pins. The printer overlays one line over the other, creating relatively good-looking characters. Obviously, though, if you're having to print each line twice, it takes twice as long to print. Dot matrix printers have been with us for quite some time, and they continue to remain. One of the key reasons is the fact that dot matrix printers can do one thing that most printers just can't do. That is, they can print duplicate or triplicate forms. With the dot matrix printer, we actually have a physical impact. That means you can put carbon copies through the dot matrix printer and have them print out. For that reason, you still see them used for a variety of different purposes, like rental contracts, receipts, or other forms where we need to print copies in duplicate or triplicate. Most other printer types don't use impact. The next type of printer we want to talk about is called an inkjet printer. Inkjet printers create high-quality output and they are fairly inexpensive. Let's take a look at how an inkjet printer works. Just like with the dot matrix printer, we have our platen and we use a feeder to pull a piece of paper through, wrap it around the platen, and insert it between the platen and the print head. If you have a duplexing assembly, the printer will feed the paper through the printer twice, printing on both sides of the paper. The ink cartridges sit inside a carriage and a belt is used to move the carriage across the paper. When you install a new cartridge, use the printer calibration utility to calibrate the inkjet so that all the ink cartridges are aligned. This ensures that the final output is properly represented on the paper. While a dot matrix printer uses continuous feed paper, an inkjet printer uses cut sheets of paper, just like you would use for a copy machine. The print head in an inkjet printer is similar to a dot matrix printer. If we were to rotate this print head and look at it the way it would look to the piece of paper, you'd see it's composed of a series of dots, just like a dot matrix printer. However, instead of having pins inside that come out and strike a ribbon, we have a whole bunch of ink here inside of our ink reservoir. This is where inkjet printers diverge from a dot matrix printer. It's actually kind of cool. What happens is that current is applied to a specific pattern of nozzles. Let's say we want to fire these nozzles. To do that, an electrical current is applied to each of these nozzles. And when that happens, the ink that's inside of this nozzle actually boils. It creates an air bubble. When that happens, it actually shoots a jet of ink and makes a dot on the piece of paper. By varying the current and applying it to different nozzles in the print head, we're able to create different patterns on the paper. Inkjet printers have one weakness, however. And that is that most of the electronic circuitry that makes up the printer is not actually in the printer itself. When you use up the ink in the ink reservoir, you have to get a new ink cartridge. And how much does it cost? Probably as much, if not more, than the printer itself. That's because most of the electronic circuitry that makes up the inkjet printer is actually in the print head. So when you have to change the ink reservoir, you are buying a new component that makes up the inkjet printer. And that's why the cartridges are expensive. Let's talk about the next type of printer called a solid ink printer. A solid ink printer creates smaller, more uniform dots than a dot matrix or inkjet printer. And instead of using a ribbon or liquid ink, a solid ink printer uses solid sticks of ink that are inserted inside the printer. Let's take a look at how the process works because it's a little different from the dot matrix or the inkjet printers. In fact, it's kind of a hybrid between an inkjet printer and a laser printer. In a solid ink printer, multiple solid ink sticks are melted within the print head and are jetted onto a drum. As the ink is jetted onto the drum, it actually rotates. It can contain one full page of content, so if you were to look at the drum after the ink was melted, the top of the page might start here and go around, and the bottom of the page would be right here. After the ink is melted onto the drum, a piece of paper is then drawn from a paper tray and is rotated around the drum or drawn across the drum. And as it does so, the melted ink from the drum is transferred onto the piece of paper. The ink then cools and adheres itself to the paper. Solid ink printers work really well. In fact, they create some of the highest quality output you can get outside of a regular printing process. The next type of printer we want to talk about is a thermal printer. Thermal printers have been with us for quite some time, so it's older technology. In fact, many of the older fax machines and many of the lower-end fax machines that you buy today still use thermal technology. Instead of using ribbon or ink or melted ink sticks, they use special paper that reacts to heat. It uses heat to transfer an image from the printer onto this special paper. Then the feed assembly takes the thermal paper off the roll and sends it through the printer and then outside the printer. Since thermal printers use special paper, we don't use these printers very often because the paper is expensive. The next type of printer we want to talk about is a dye sublimation printer. Just like a solid ink printer, dye sublimation printers have actually been around for a while. A dye sublimation printer allows you to print photolab quality pictures. The key benefit is that they provide a smooth blending of colors. That's something that's hard to achieve with other types of printers. The dye sublimation printer does this really well, and that's why we can get such high-quality photographs using this type of technology. In addition, it's also less vulnerable to fading and distortion over time. If you've ever printed anything off of a color inkjet printer and put it in a file, then when you come back to it a year later, you know that the inks fade. They also tend to bleed just a little bit. In dye sublimation printing, the colors are not laid down as individual dots. Inside of a dye sublimation printer is a long roll of semi-transparent film, and that film is made up of individual sheets stuck end to end of red, blue, yellow, and gray film. Embedded in this film are solid dyes corresponding to the 4 basic colors used in high-end printing, meaning cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. If you've ever taken something to a professional printer to be printed, and you printed it using standard laserjet or inkjet technology, or even created the file using red, green, and blue technology, you know they'll say, "Oh, we can't do this. We need the electronic file formatted using these 4 colors instead of red, green, and blue." So how does a dye sublimation printer work, then? The way it works is that we have a print head like we do with other types of printers, and then we have our transparent film. We're looking at this end on now, and then we have our piece of paper. What happens is that the print head heats up and it passes over the transparent film. As this happens, the dyes that are in this film vaporize and are transferred to the paper. They actually permeate the glossy surface of the paper, and as they cool, they return back to their solid form. In this way, we can transfer a very high-quality image to a piece of paper. The nice thing about dye sublimation printers is that they create a gentle gradation. Instead of having distinct dots of particular colors, it creates a gentle gradation between colors, and this makes it so that the photograph looks like a regular photograph. It looks like a real picture. There's one other type of printing technology that you need to be familiar with, and that's the laser printer. Than what we've talked about here. So